Okay, back for another session of Cameron's Corner. You guys are lucky I'm on break, right? Getting a bunch of these videos all in one day. I'm not sure if you're lucky or not. But I'm gonna keep plowing ahead. Hopefully you find it beneficial. All right, where we left off was we're gonna actually dive into the story. Okay, so if I start in Genesis 1, it says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And at some point in time, I'm going to break that down. Not right now. This is part of the struggle I have with doing this, is I'm not sure the best way to break all this down, but I've already started to kind of break down in the beginning, like what that means. It's a loaded phrase, right? God is a loaded word. It's the word Elohim. And there's so much to that, and created and heaven and earth and everything. But I'm going to try to sprinkle those concepts throughout the rest of the story. But I'm putting that out there, hopefully, so I remember to do it. Okay, so in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void. And darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Okay, so the image you should have here is of a giant ocean. Okay, and there's darkness on that ocean, the face of the deep. Okay, deep is like a giant ocean. And the Spirit of God is moving upon the face of the waters too. So there's three things there. There's the deep, there's the darkness on the deep, and there's the Spirit of God. Okay, and these three things are going to be the basis of all that comes next. Like they're the materials out of which the earth will be created. So in Abraham 3, when it says, let us go down, for there is space there, and take of these materials whereon we'll make an earth, and we'll make an earth whereon these may dwell. The materials are represented as the waters, or the deep, okay, and darkness, and the Spirit of God. Okay? All right. So I'm going to create like a typology with you all. I'm going to run through scriptures and show you how other prophets and apostles have interpreted the waters. Okay. And then I'll show you a couple of scriptures about darkness, because that one's easier. And then I'll dig into the Spirit of God too. So the two I'm going to really focus on is waters and Spirit of God, and just a little bit on the darkness. Okay. But we're going to focus again, not on trying to align this with the Big Bang Theory or evolution or anything like that. We're going to focus on how does this bear record of Christ and the plan of salvation. All right, so waters, okay? So, and my dog is barking. I got to look up. Okay, the first one I want to share with you all is in Job, okay? So Job, you guys know the story of Job. Job is this, Job gets, there's like a council in heaven at the beginning of Job, and the Satan shows up in the council and says, hey, Job's only a good guy because you bless him so much. If you took away all of his blessings, he wouldn't be such a good guy. He wouldn't praise you and keep your commandments and everything. And so the whole book of Job is like basically this bargain that God and the devil strike. Like, okay, go ahead, test Job, see how it goes. And for like the first couple chapters, Job does pretty well. And then the very end, is also good for Job. But in the middle, like 30 chapters, the middle 35 chapters or so, Job struggles. And we skip that part when we read about Job. And that's unfortunate, because we always think like Job never said a bad word, never complained. And it's just not true. Like in Job chapter 3 or 4, Job asks that God will, eliminate him, get rid of him. See, like right here, verse 1 of chapter 3. After this opened Job his mouth and cursed his day. And Job spake and said, let the day perish wherein I was born, and the night in which it was said, there is a man-child conceived. let that day be darkness. Let not God regard it from above, neither let the light shine upon it. See, this is actually ties into our theme. I was going to do waters first, but I'll just do a little bit of darkness on this one. So Job actually curses the day he's born. And he's like, he's using the symbolism of creation to do his curse. He's basically saying, like, the day I was born, there was like light in the darkness. Like every birth, not just Job's birth, but every birth was like that. A child is born, it's like a little piece of heaven just entered into our world, right? A little bit of light comes into our world. And Job is saying, let that day that I was born be darkness. There is a man, and let that day be, let it perish. And the night in which I was conceived, let it be cursed, basically. Verse 5, let darkness and the shadow of death stain it. Let a cloud dwell upon it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. As for that night, let darkness seize upon it. Let it not be joined unto the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of the months. So he's basically like saying, reverse time and let that day that I was born not even ever happen. Let it remain uncreated in the pre-creation state. Let it be like darkness upon the face of the waters, basically. Okay. So that's a good one for darkness, right? See, the darkness is like the opposite of light in that story. Like, let not the light shine upon it, which is what happens in creation. God said, let there be light, and there was light, right? And the light was shining in the darkness at that moment in time. And Job's like, nope, reverse it, reverse creation. The day I was born should have never happened. I hate being alive. It's so miserable. Okay? And Job chapter 7 says, Job chapter 7, Job continues his complaining. And he says in verse 12, okay? Well, let me say in verse 11, he's like, therefore I will not refrain my mouth. Like his friends show up and they're like, Job, you really shouldn't complain like this much. And Job's like, I'm not going to refrain my mouth. I will speak in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. So see, Job did complain. There's two things going here I want to point out. Like one is elaborate on the creation story. The other one is to help you guys understand Job's story. Like Job did complain. So everybody's always like, oh, we should be like Job and never complain and da-da-da. Nope, Job complained. He complained for like 35 chapters, like tens of pages of Job complaining, okay? And God still came to Job and talked to him and helped him. I think it's a better story because the way we normally tell it in our lives is you have to be perfect in order for God to help you in your trial. Like if you complain, then God won't help you. Like, again, is God that petty? I really don't like the way we make God so petty. He won't help you when you complain about your situation, when you are struggling, when you hurt. That's when you need his help the most. And the story of Job actually shows that God helps people who are in deep distress, who wish they were never born, okay? So Job, the message of Job is actually more hopeful because if you recognize that Job wasn't perfect, if you recognize that Job complained a bunch, okay, so Job is saying to his friends are like, Job, don't complain. The friends actually say the things we always say in church. They're like, if you complain, God's not going to bless you. He's not going to help you. And Job's like, I'm not going to refrain my mouth. I'm going to speak out. I'm going to complain in the bitterness of my soul. Then he asks this weird question. Am I a sea or a whale that thou settest a watch over me? This is a question that Job is asking God, okay? So that doesn't make any sense if you interpret sea or whale literally. And whale here again in the Hebrew is like sea monster, okay? What Job is saying is, am I like the sea or the sea monsters in the beginning of the creation story that you needed to like defeat me and set a watch over me? Because that's what the creation story is. It's a drama of God's triumph over chaos and the agents of chaos, which are the sea monsters. And Job is saying, am I one of those things? Like, aren't I better than that? Aren't I different than the sea? I'm not chaos. I'm not a chaos monster that you should have to like set a watch over me and like afflict me like what you're doing, because this is the way you're treating me is how you would treat the chaos or the sea monsters. That's what Job's question means, okay? Another good one is Psalm 74. So you see already in Job, there's many other instances in Job, but you can see in Job a couple of the instances where he uses darkness and water from the creation story poetically, right? Psalm 74 says, let me get there. Psalm 74 is, in Psalm 74, the people of Israel are complaining because their lives are miserable. They're being oppressed by somebody. We don't know who, but they've got something bad going on. And there's trial and tribulation, just like with Job. And the psalmist writes, why withdrawest thou thy hand, even thy right hand? Pluck it out of thy bosom. Like, don't hold your hands back from me. Help me. Okay? For God is my king of old, working salvation in the midst of the earth. Thou didst divide the sea by thy strength. Thou breakest the heads of the dragons in the waters. Thou breakest the heads of Leviathan in pieces, and gavest him to be meat to the people inhabiting the wilderness. Thou didst cleave the fountain in the flood. Thou driedst up mighty rivers. The day is thine, the night also is thine. Thou hast prepared the light and the sun. See, the psalmist is going back to the creation story to say, hey, back in the day, you divided the sea, you organized chaos, you broke the heads of the dragons, you like defeated the chaos monsters, and you created the earth and dried up all the mighty floods and the rivers and everything that would have prevented human beings from living on it and from prospering. And you did all these wonderful things. Why don't you do it now? Okay, that's the point. So the psalmist is using the creation story to like invoke God's help now in a current moment where like they're in the midst of chaos and trial and tribulation. Okay, in Psalm 89, verse 9, the psalmist says again, the psalmist in this one is complaining because King David was promised that he would rule over Israel forever, and King David is not ruling over Israel. They're like, this psalm was written at a point where whoever was the Davidic king wasn't effectively ruling, like there was a foreign power in charge. And so they're like, come on, God. Like, again, they're in the middle of a trial or tribulation, and they go back to the creation story and say, thou rulest the raging of the sea, when the waves thereof arise, thou stillest them. Thou hast broken Rahab is the name of one of the chaos dragons, in pieces as one that is slain. Thou hast scattered thine enemies with thy strong arm. Okay, so he's saying, like, back in the day, you defeated chaos and dragons and stuff when you created the world. Why are you hiding yourself now? Why are you letting the chaos dragons in the water, metaphorically speaking, drown us now? Okay, and then he even says, the whole point of the Davidic king was, verse 25, I will set his hand, the Davidic king, also in the sea, and his right hand in the rivers. So like, you were supposed to give us a king to prevent the chaos waters from flooding us and destroying us and making us drown. So you see, they're using the waters, not literally, but to metaphorically talk about their trials and tribulations, because that's what water is. If it's chaos, it's the thing that makes you drown. Like, human beings don't dwell in water very well, right? Like, eventually you drown, or eventually whatever crazy creature is in the ocean eats you, right? So, and you can call whatever those crazy creatures are whatever you want. You can call them, sharks or squid or whatever. But at the end of the day, they're all monsters. They're all dragons, right? That and they're dangerous, and they're antithetical to life. All right, another one I mentioned in my last video is Jonah. Let me go to Jonah. I love Jonah. Okay, Jonah chapter 2, it says, Jonah prayed unto the Lord his God out of the fish's belly, and said, I cried by reason of mine affliction unto the Lord, and he heard me out of the belly of hell, cried I, thou heardest my voice. So, see, he's in the fish's belly, but Jonah says it's the belly of hell. Hell meaning Sheol, the place of the dead. And he's in affliction. So you see, every time these these poetic things come up in the Old Testament about chaos, like trials and tribulations. Not every time, but very often the person who's in the middle of a trial or a tribulation, the person who's drowning in their trials and tribulations, refers back to the creation story, to the waters, to explain the difficulty of their life, right? That they're drowning, basically. And the fish that swallowed Jonah is like a chaos monster, right? He says in verse 3, "For thou hadst cast me into the deep," and that's the word from the creation story, in the deep, in the midst of the seas, and the floods compassed me about, all the billows and thy waves passed over me. He's drowning, right? Verse 3, Jonah's drowning. "Then I said, I am cast out of thy sight." See, he's out of God's sight because he's in the chaos. See, like that's, the chaos is the place where God's presence hasn't yet conquered. It's the unformed matter, and wherever God's presence comes, matter takes its shape, takes form. See, it's without, the earth was without form and void. It was out of God's sight. It was a place of affliction. It was a place where you drown. Okay. "Then said I am cast out of thy sight, yet I will look again toward thy holy temple." So like Jonah in this state that he's in, he's thinking the only way I can ever overcome this chaos that I'm in is through the temple, right? "The waters compassed me about, even to the soul. The depth closed me round about. The weeds were wrapped about my head. I went down to the bottoms of the mountains. The earth with hers was about me forever. Yet hast thou brought up my life from corruption, O Lord my God." See, so Jonah, when he's saved, is brought out of corruption. Corruption is like chaos again, like everything's falling apart. It's not working the way it's supposed to. It's out of order, right? And so this is it's beautiful poetry to show how the authors of the Bible use the imagery of the creation story to describe their afflictions and their pains and their turmoil and their corruption and all these things. All right, let's go to the New Testament. Okay, Romans chapter 6. And Paul tells us that, "Know ye not that so many of us as were baptized into Jesus Christ were baptized into his death? Therefore we are buried with him by baptism into death, that like as Christ was raised up from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so we also should walk in newness of life." So you see, the baptism, the font, the water, is death. It's chaos. And the thing that raises you up out of the water, that brings you up into order and organization, is the glory of the Father, the light, the Spirit of God, which we're going to talk about in a minute, which is the light of God. We're not talking about the Holy Ghost. We're talking about the presence of God that shines out of him into the immensity of space, that gives everything shape and form and life and light. Okay. And so Paul is using the imagery of the creation story here to even describe the point of baptism. Okay. That you are baptized into death, into disorder, into chaos, and brought forth again in new life by the glory of the Father, just as Christ was. Okay. And then a couple more examples from the New Testament. And you guys, I want to let you know, I'm not even covering every possible scripture. I'm trying to show you enough to show you that, like, how this is a legitimate theme, that I'm not making this up. I'm not cherry picking one or two scriptures, that it's everywhere. Okay. Revelation 12, we're told about the 7-headed dragon that chases the woman in the book of Revelation. And it says that the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. So the dragon in the book of Revelation that's trying to destroy the woman who represents the church, he doesn't breathe fire to get rid of her. He breathes water as a flood to drown her, because the dragon is a chaos monster. He's an agent of the chaos, and the chaos is the water, the death. It's death. It's the power of death and disorder. Okay, and then one more in Revelation 17. Okay. Okay, and it says, the great whore, and there came one of the 7 angels, saying unto me, I will shew unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters. Okay, so the great whore represents like the opposite of the church in the book of Revelation. It's like the great and abominable church, basically, from Nephi's vision of the tree of life. And she sits upon, like, her throne, her power comes from the waters, from the chaos. Like, that is the source of her power, of her priesthood, you could say, because there is a false priesthood that the devil and his agents use, and it's the power of chaos, okay? And you can see over here in verse 15, it says, and he saith unto me, the angels telling John, the waters which thou sawest where the whore sitteth are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. So the waters are even symbolic here. Like, she gets her power from all of the chaos in the world, from all the different people and multitudes and nations and tongues. Like, she can manipulate all of these people and create chaos and division and strife and affliction and all the things, right? And water represents that, because water is chaotic itself. You can't stand in it. You can't live in it. You eventually drown in it, right? And so it represents the power, because again, whatever your throne is established on is like the basis of your power. She sits upon the waters, right? That's the source of her power is chaos. So the typology I hope that you're seeing here, if you go back to Genesis chapter 1, is that God, the earth was without form and void. It was chaos, right? It was just a giant vat of chaos, giant like ocean of nothingness. It was, as Lehi would say, a compound in one. There weren't any distinctions in it yet, right? It was just, that's what an ocean is. It's just it's a oneness of nothing, right? From this perspective, I understand there's a different way of looking at the ocean where it's teeming with life and it's wonderful and beautiful and everything. I get that. I'm just trying to help you guys understand the way the biblical writers are using this metaphor, okay? And what they're trying to say is that the ocean can be used as this wonderful metaphor of chaos and death and despair and affliction and trial, and it's a compound in one, as Lehi would say, right? There's no distinctions in it yet. And now that's one piece. That's one of the elements. Now there's one thing I'll say about water, though, okay, that you'll see in this story is that water takes the shape you give it, okay? So, and this is important because we say in the Doctrine and Covenants, let me go to section 93, and I'll just do water right now, and then I'll take a break so you guys can do these in small bite sizes. But in D&C 93, it says that 33, man is spirit, the elements are eternal, and spirit and element inseparably connected receive a fullness of joy. And when separated, man cannot receive a fullness of joy. The elements are the tabernacle of God. Okay, so the elements are eternal. So this water, the elements that we're talking about in the story, the way they're represented in the creation story, the chaotic elements out of which the earth will be made, is water, okay? And they are eternal. And when you join those elements together with the Spirit, then there is a fullness of joy. And so you can see in this moment of verse 2 from Genesis chapter 1 that their elements are there. And literally, like, water is an element, like in the ancient world, it's one of the elements, right? It's there, and the Spirit of God is moving on it. It's about ready to start forming something. It's about ready to do what D&C 93 says, which is join spirit and element together so that there's joy and life and light and all the good things. But before that happens, there's just chaos. But the element can take the shape it's given. Now, this is important. This is a property of the elements. You see, because they're eternal, God didn't make the water the way it is. It just is that way, and it always has been and always will be. So one of the rules, you could say, of the universe is that the elements take the shape you give it. That's what this story is showing. And that, so in a sense, they reflect back to you what you put into it, right? That's what water does. It reflects your image back to you. So when God says, speaks out, let there be light, or let there be a firmament, or let there be whatever, the waters reflect back to God what what he speaks, because that's what they do. That's what the elements are capable of doing. That's their inherent property. So already, this is an important point, already within the story, the elements show you like that the law of justice is woven into the fabric of things. It's just part of the nature of the elements, that they take the shape that they're given. They reflect back what is shown to them. So the world is shaped by God. I mean, in this story, by God's thoughts and words and actions. The elements take the shape he gives them. But that is to say, on our own little scale, later on as we go along, we'll see that in our own little scale, the elements do the same thing for us. They take the shape we give it. And that is the fundamental problem that we're talking about. So the law of justice, that when we talk about the atonement and how the atonement is supposed to satisfy justice, we always go to the courtroom in order to explain justice. But really, in the scriptures and in the endowment, we are being told to come to this story to understand justice. And justice is just part of the elements. They take the shape you give them. They reflect back to you what you send out. Okay? And that is an eternal law that cannot be changed. And that is both a blessing and a curse. If you're God, it's a blessing because everything God does is wonderful. So the elements reflect back to him his wonderfulness, right? But you and I aren't so wonderful. So the elements reflect back to us things that we don't want them to reflect back to us. And that's the trouble that we'll run into and that God's going to have to solve through the atonement. So that's one of the steps of the pre-creation. It takes a while to get through this stuff, right? But we just explained pre-creation water. I'll stop for now and come back and do pre-creation darkness, and then I'll stop and do pre-creation spirit of God. I'm realizing I won't be able to do all of these in one video. But all right, we've begun the journey, and I hope you see the depth of the story here and what's at stake and how awesome it actually is when you dig in.